Welcome, friends, to another episode of the show In Search of Lost River Saraswati. We have Dr. Utpal Bhanjo, an oncologist by profession and Indologist by passion, with us today. In the last episode, Dr. Bhanjo explained to us the importance of River Saraswati in Vedic scriptures, Mahabharata and Puranas. We learned that River Saraswati was mentioned in Rig Veda 70 times, whereas River Ganga has been referred only 3 times. In this episode, we ask Dr. Bhanjo how these scriptural descriptions relate to modern day findings. We hear a lot of debate on this issue. Is there any scholarly agreement on this topic?
Thank you, Kaushik. Welcome, friends and viewers, to our continued discussion on the topic In Search of the Lost River Saraswati. Those who did not hear our previous presentation, in our last episode, we discussed the scriptural descriptions of the revered River Saraswati. Now, let us examine and compare the ancient literary depictions of the Saraswati River in the Vedas and the later Vedic literature, including Brahmanas and epics such as Mahabharata, with the present day available scientific data collected by several surveyors, explorers, geographers, cartographers, in addition to other scientific data. Many times we talk of Saraswati River as mythical. This is a misconception. There is nothing mythical about Saraswati, except that we refer to its imaginary presence at Prayag's Triveni Sangam, which is actually the nostalgia from the Puranic age. This nostalgia continued until our modern times. But this has never been mentioned in Vedas, Brahmanas or Mahabharata. There is a school of historians who are deeply invested in Aryan invasion theory or Aryan migration theory, considers Saraswati to be mythical, as otherwise their theory, which had been nurtured for the last 1.5 century, will fall apart like a sandcastle. In reality, as we will see in the later discussion from the evidences, that there is nothing mythical about Saraswati. Saraswati was not mythical, but was a prehistoric river that lost or died out before the historical period of classical India. Saraswati was as real as the Ganges is. Since 1970s, we have been hearing the sensational news in the tabloid media that ancient Saraswati has been rediscovered and its course has been traced by satellite imagery. Yes, remote sensing satellite have confirmed the paleo channels of Saraswati River system, but the dried riverbed of this mega river system had been found and mapped by cartographers for the last 150 years. They identified this huge riverbed of the Ghaggar Hakra with the Saraswati River mentioned in the Rig Veda. Present-day Ghaggar Hakra River is a seasonal paltry river, flows in the large dry bed and reaching only up to Anupgarh near the international border during heavy monsoons. Identification of this Ghaggar River as the relic of Vedic Saraswati was first proposed by a French geographer, Louis Vivien de Saint-Martin. Prior to that, British topographers already identified the disproportionately large dry riverbed of Ghaggar between Jamuna and Sutlej, precisely where Rigveda has mentioned the Saraswati to be. Presence of a puny river pronounced variously as different deviant forms of Saraswati like Sursuti, Soorsuti, or Sarsuti, Sarsuti, by the local people noted on a number of British maps from 1760 onward. The very first such map was the Library Atlas by Bryce, Collier and Smiths, published in 1760. From then onward, we have more maps described. James Rennell was a British geographer, and he published a detailed map of India in 1778 in his Memoir of Map of Hindustan or the Mughal Empire. In this map, he showed Sursuti, spelled as Sursuoty, meeting the Kaggar, Caggar, which is present-day Ghaggar, flowing down from the Sivalik hills. In the 19th century, British topographers James Todd in 1810, Major Colvin in 1833, and Major F. McKeeshan in 1844 surveyed the Ghaggar's riverbed and found it to be far wider for a small seasonal stream such as Ghaggar. Soon, these reports and maps reached the French geographer Louis Vivien de Saint-Martin. Combining the physical evidence and literary description, he concluded, quote, "The trace of the ancient river was recently found, still quite recognizable, and was followed far to west. This discovery confirmed the correctness of the tradition." Unquote. In the next few decades, nearly all European Indologists and Sanskritists concurred with Saint-Martin. In the second half of the 19th century, a clear consensus was reached by these scholars. H. Wilson in 1840, F. Max Muller in 1859, C. F. Oldham in 1874, M. Monier Williams in 1875, and A. Weber in 1878 all concurred with this thesis. In the 20th century, the scholars who agreed with this notion were A. MacDonald, A. B. Keith, F. E. Pargeter, Louis Renaud, Jean Philozat, T. Burrow, A. L. Bussam, and Jan Gonda. Geologist R. D. Oldham in 1886 and more recently V. M. K. Puri and K. S. Valdia joined the scholarship. Geographer Samsul Islam Siddiqui in 1944 and Herbert Wilhelmi in 1969 endorsed to the same thesis. Let us talk about the archaeologist Alexander Cunningham, who was the first Director General of then young, it was only from 10 years prior to this publication, the Archaeological Survey of India. So he was nominated the Director General for Archaeological Survey of India, and he published a monumental work, Ancient Geography of India, in 1871. This gentleman, Alexander Cunningham, was a great scholar. He studied the ancient Indian and Greek texts by Strabo, as well as the testimonies of the Chinese scholars who studied in India. Combining all the available data and information, he reached the same conclusion. It is important to mention the name of archaeologist Mark Orwell Stein. He published a paper in 1917 identifying the Vedic river Saraswati with the Ghaggar-Hakra system. From archaeological perspective, he was interested in finding whether the Harappan civilization extended into the Saraswati Valley. So, in 1941, at the very mature age of 78, he crisscrossed the arid region of Bikaner and Bawalpur. Bikaner in Rajasthan and Bawalpur is now in Pakistan. And he crisscrossed this land on horseback and camelback. And he discovered several artifacts from Indus or Harappan civilization. He found potsherds and seals, etc., which were same as those were found in the Indus Valley. He published his findings in 1942. His paper was titled Survey of Ancient Sites Along the Lost River Saraswati. He concluded that this arid region was home to numerous prehistoric mounds dating back to Harappan age. More recent archaeologists, starting from Mortimer Wheeler in 1950, I think you probably all know Mortimer Wheeler was also Director General of Archaeological Survey of India, the last British director. Amalendra Ghosh in 1952, J.M. Castle in 1969, Raymond and Bridget Alchin in 1982, S.P. Gupta 1989, V.N. Mishra in 1994, B.B. Lal in 1997. Again, B.B. Lal was, I think, a pupil of Mortimer Wheeler. And when Mortimer Wheeler left after partition, B.B. Lal took over the Director Generalship of Archaeological Survey of India. He was also awarded Padma Bhushan by Government of India. Then J.M. Kenwar in 1998. J.M. Kenwar is a professor of archaeology in University of Wisconsin, Madison currently. G.L. Posel in 1999. R.S. Best in 1996. D.K. Chakraborty in 1990. Jane McIntosh in 2002. As well as I should mention about A.L. Dani and Rafiq Mughal, the archaeologists who contributed to the findings from the Pakistan side. I should mention another person, Mr. Jim Safer, who is a professor of anthropology at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. He is currently in faculty. He conducted archaeological field research in South Asia, and he also contributed to the current thesis. Among the notable scholars who disagreed with the identification of Vedic Saraswati with the Ghaggar-Hakra river system were Edward Thomas in 1883 and Alfred Hillenbrand in 1891, who identified Saraswati with Helmand and Arghandab rivers of Afghanistan respectively. Obviously, their conclusion was based on the then prevalent Indo-European linguistic model. Only a handful of present-day Western Indologists and archaeologists, including Michael Witzel and Steve Farmer of Harvard University, want to hold on to the antiquated AIT, which is Aryan invasion theory, and do not participate in the broad scholarly consensus that we see so far. The so-called liberal or progressive scholars of India, including Ms. Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, Surin Ratnagar, Rajesh Kochar, Suraj Van, and late R.S. Sharma, started questioning the identifications of Saraswati with Ghaggar since late 1980s, when it was evident from the scientific data that Saraswati started dwindling in the late or mature Harappan phase in 2200 BCE, and the process of the desiccation or demise was nearly completed by 1900 BCE. Many of these historians were participating in the scholarly consensus of identification of Saraswati with the Ghaggar-Hakra system until late 1980s, when they changed their tone, because by that time it was more or less established fact based on scientific evidences that Saraswati's demise happened by 1900 BCE. You know why? Because this finding was causing chronological absurdity in the theory in which these historians had lifetime investment. You know what is that theory? Aryan invasion theory that they proposed that happened in 1500 BCE. Irfan Habib in 2001 considered Saraswati to be a mythical river, and Rajesh Kochar in 2000 reverted to Afghan Saraswati hypothesis, but without acknowledging his previous researchers from 19th century who mentioned about it. But these historians failed to answer some of the key questions. Number one, there is no mention of Afghan Saraswati in Rig Veda, although there is mention of western Afghan tributaries of Indus, and Rig Veda places Saraswati between Yamuna on the east and Sutlej on the west. Secondly, let us presume that Aryans entered into the Indian subcontinent in 1500 BC, and of course through the Khyber Pass crossing Afghanistan. Why, after settling down in the Sapta Sindhu area, these Aryans will extol about a defunct river which died 400 years prior to their arrival, where there are mightier rivers like Indus or the 5 major tributaries of the Indus. And thirdly, the same circular logic of the AIT or its subsequent version AMT or Aryan migration theory. The AIT or AMT has to be sacrosanct, and the evidence of Saraswati is questioned. Kaushik, it is sad that there is political and acrimonious war on academic platform regarding this topic. I should mention a couple of present-day Indologists and scholars. One of them is Konrad Elst, a Belgian Indologist who is very vocal about historicity of Saraswati and against Aryan invasion or migration theory. Another person I should mention is Shri Danino. He is a French born, but he is residing in India. He is an Indian citizen now, and he is there in India since 1970s, and he has done extensive research and meta-analysis of all these research publications regarding Saraswati, and he himself has published a very informative work, the book named In the Trail of Lost River Saraswati, published by Penguin Books. I would recommend everyone to read Mitchell Danino's book On the Trail of Lost River Saraswati to find out information in more details. Before I end, I should mention some of the eminent Indian figures who believed in the existence of Saraswati based on textual and other internal evidences. I should name them in chronological order: Swami Dayananda Saraswati, Swami Vivekananda, Sri Aurobindo, P.T. Srinivasa Iyengar, B.R. Ambedkar, and A.D. Pushalkar. So, We have seen today, contrary to our popular belief, what the scholarly consensus is on this topic. So many of the learned and eminent scholars from various fields identified the Rigvedic Saraswati and also reached a consensus regarding its demise around 4,000 years before present. Now, several scientific disciplines in the recent decades, since the 1970s satellite imagery delineated numerous paleo-channels of the Ghaggar-Hakra vis-a-vis Saraswati River, have confirmed or corroborated to the thesis. These also contributed to our understanding of the great prehistoric river, its contribution to our living culture and continuity of our civilization for at least 9,000 years. I will conclude here today. Thank you for listening. See you again at our next episode.
Thank you, viewers. We now heard how the scholars are divided or united on the issue. In the next episode, we will talk about the satellite imageries and other evidences to prove the existence of River Saraswati. Please join us for another episode. Till then, bye. Have a nice day.